Okay, shalom everyone, welcome. Sorry for my absence online. I was very active here in LA the last week, but not active online. So, excuse my absence. This is the first class this week. I wasn't going to teach tonight. I wasn't not feeling too well. Seemed like something was trying to take me down, but we're not going to let it. But I didn't want to leave without teaching anything. So usually I teach Chabad Hasidus, which takes a certain amount of intensity. So tonight I'm going to go a little lighter. We're going to learn a teaching of Hasidus from one of my favorite teachers and holy tzaddikim, the great Reb Tzvi Elimelech of Dinov. The saintly Rebbe Reb Tzvi Elimelech of Dinov, known as the Bnei Yissaschar. And in his Sefer on the Torah, it's called Igra the Kala. He has a beautiful teaching on this week's parsha, and this is what I'll share with you. We'll learn it inside. Okay, it's about the sale of Yosef. A stunning story of the sale of Yosef. So the sale of Yosef comes about when Yaakov, after the dreams, Yosef has the dreams. The brothers don't like him, and then it says like this in chapter 37, verse number 12, that his brothers went to see to pasture the sheep of their father in the city of Shechem. Now Yisrael says to Yosef, that means Yaakov was called Yisrael, says to Yosef, your brothers are pasturing the sheep in Shechem. Let me go send you to them. You go, and I will send you to them. And Yosef says, I'm ready. So Yaakov says to Yosef, Lechna, please go. The peace of your brothers, the shlomatzon, and the peace of the sheep. Vashiveni davar, and return to me what you see how they're doing, and come back to me and tell me a report. Good. So Yosef is ready to take on the mission, and as Rashi says, this is an indication of Yosef's holiness and total devotion to his father, because Yosef knew good and well the danger involved in going to the brothers. There wasn't exactly the best rapport between him and his brothers, and he was suspicious that they were getting very, very upset at him. So Yaakov dispatches Yosef from the valley of Hebron, and Yosef arrives in Shechem. Then when he arrives at Shechem, he doesn't see the brothers. Okay, the brothers are nowhere to be seen. So he's searching for them, and he seems to be lost. So the verse says, a man encounters him. According to the Midrashic interpretation that Rashi brings, this is a angel, Gabriel. In Isaiah Basade, he sees Yosef seems to be wandering in the field, which is interesting because he should have been in Shechem. But he's not in Shechem, he's somewhat of in the vicinity of Shechem. He's in the fields. Usually fields are outside the city. In any case, the man asks him, Matavakesh, what are you searching? And he answers, I'm looking for my brothers. Hagidan Ali, please let me know, where are they pasturing? I'm looking for my brothers. Maybe you can tell me where they are. The man says, yeah, your brothers, they were here. Kishamati, because I heard, they were saying, Nelcha Daisana, let us go to a place called Dosan. Okay, so Yosef now has a new address. He pops it into the GPS, and off he goes. Yosef goes after his brothers. He meets them in Dosan. Okay, but the verse says he doesn't ever really get to them in a way that he can ask them a question, because as soon as they see him from a distance coming off the hills, they begin to discuss him, and they begin to schemes of how they're going to hurt him. First, they want to kill him, and so on and so forth. But as soon as he arrived, before he can say a peep from his mouth, they had decided already to cast him in the pit. They stripped his clothing off. They threw him in the pit. And the rest is history. Joseph goes down to Mitzrayim. That's the story. Okay, so let's take a look at this very insightful teaching from this great holy master and tzaddik, the great Bnei Yissaschar, is a great Hasidic Rebbe and a great master Kabbalist. Okay. Let me read it inside. And he says, go out and see the peace of your brothers, the peace of the sheep, and respond to me. Give me a report. We've already said, I love this, that it's impossible. I like it because the Lubavitcher Rebbe uses this all the time, and I never saw this anywhere else besides in the Rebbe's talks. The Rebbe is always emphasizing in all his talks, when a tzaddik asks for something or prayed for something or says something, it has to happen. I guess it takes one to know one to be, you got to be one to know one. Someone like a tzaddik knows that there's no such a thing as words of a tzaddik. Why? Because the tzaddik's words are the Shekhinah speaking in him. The real big tzaddikim, the real holy, righteous, saintly people, when they're speaking, God is speaking through them. So their words cannot come back empty-handed. So therefore, he says, and even a word that comes out of a tzaddik accidentally, a slip of the tongue, could be very, very powerfully good, or it can be very dangerous. Like we know, Yaakov slipped up with his tongue regarding his wife, and his wife died. He said, whoever we're going to find those idols should die. That was a little too fast on his end, but it wasn't him that made that decision. Rachel, in a sense, he can't blame Yaakov. Rachel needed to die at that time. How did Hashem bring it about? He made Yaakov slip up with his tongue, through God speaking through his tongue. And he decreed the decree, and then it was fulfilled just a little while later with the birth of Benjamin, with Binyamin. Even something that comes out of his mouth accidentally. Why it has to be fulfilled? Because it goes out, it goes out from the ruler. It must be fulfilled. The Shekhinah speaks through the throat of the tzaddik. So if you get a bracha from a tzaddik, there's no room for any anxiety ever. It's moving. It's this explicit bracha we're talking about. It's if he says something is going to be. The Shekhinah speaks through the mouth of the tzaddik. Dvarim amitiyim, it's true words. And the reason for that is only a person whose mouth is so holy and so godly, and he never ever speaks anything that is not kosher. A tzaddik whose every word is measured and carefully articulated to be positive and holy and godly. So a person like that, number one, even if it's his own words, since he's so careful with his words have enormous potency, but especially when the Shekhinah speaks through his mouth. And as we're going to see soon, in a person himself, there could be moments when the Shekhinah is speaking through him, and there are moments when he himself is speaking. But even when he himself speaks, it's also very powerful. Because he has guarded his tongue. He's guarded himself from speaking empty words, vasudim or forbidden words. As it is known, to those who come in the secret of God. If you know who the Bnei Yissaschar hung out with, who were the tzaddikim he visited. He was a student of the great Chose of Lublin, the seer of Lublin. He was a student of the great Kazhnitzer Magid. He was a student of the great Rebbe Lamelech of Lezensk. This is a first-hand experience that they utter a word. This has to happen. And if it's about every person, especially Yaakov, Jacob. Why? Because Yaakov represents the attribute of truth. Yaakov is emes, is true. So every word of his has to be true. Yaakov Amiti. So can it, God forbid, be that Yaakov uttered a speech, uttered a sentence, which was in vain, which means it went nowhere. And it has to be fulfilled. Now here's where the question will become. This whole message that he gives to Yosef, go see how your brothers are doing and come back and give me a report. never happened. It never reached the fulfillment. Yosef was intercepted on the way. First of all, he never even arrived to his brothers to talk. Arrived to open a conversation with them, to see how they're doing. Would require that he asks them, and he didn't even get to do that. He definitely didn't get to return to Yaakov and give over a report. So it comes out that Yaakov's words seem to be spilled out without it being fulfilled. Its target, we see Shetziva. Let's see Shetzivahu lech not eish machacha. Go see the piece of your brothers v'shleim hatzayin and the piece of the sheep. And he never came to see. As soon as he came to his brothers, they undressed him, they grabbed him, they overpowered him. He didn't even have a chance to ask, how are you doing, while they're pulling your shirt off. It never happened. They never asked their question. They were lynching him, God forbid, And then what's even more, so first of all, even the first part has not been fulfilled, especially the second part. Vashivenu davar, answer me something. He never got back to his father. As soon as he came concealed from him, he never returned to him. Actually, Yosef never even returned to Yaakov at all. Yaakov goes to see Yosef. Vayeshev, you returned to me, never happened. Wait, when Yaakov came to see Yosef, Yosef went onto his chariot and went out towards him. But Yosef never made the trip back. Only with his bones, when the Jews went out of Egypt, that's when he made his trip back to the land of Israel. Shivenu davar means come back over here and let me know, or at least send me a message back. And that message never returned. Because when did Yosef tell his father, even if you say, okay, he doesn't have to come himself, but maybe he has to send a letter or send a message, we don't find that Yosef ever returned how the brothers were doing at Shechem. But in truth, this was all prophetic. Because God spoke through the Shekhinah, spoke through the mouth of Yaakov. Dvarim amitiyim lashuran. Every single word over here is perfect like diamonds. And everything was thoroughly fulfilled. So for that, we have to read deeper into the words. Achina Yadu, it is known, Inyan Goliath Yisrael. We know the famous idea, the deeper meaning of Jewish exile. Primarily the idea that Jews are exiled into the diaspora and scattered all over the world. It's in order to extract sparks. There are these holy sparks that have gotten lost, have gotten farblunged, have gotten scattered all over the world through a spiritual, divine, accidental collapse. When I say accidental collapse, I mean an intentional accidental collapse, which means something fell apart, powerful spiritual energies exploded, and obviously the underlying cause behind it was intentionally, because it needed to happen, but still the manner in which it happens is not similar like an accident. There's too much light, the vessels can't hold the light, and they shatter. That was the beginning of the scattering of vessels. But then the first few hundred years, or even the first 2,000 years of human experience, this scattering of sparks not only was not rectified and fixed, but it was even multiplied. More scattering and more losing of powers of holiness, to be lost and to be scattered into the unholy, it only increased. And that increased through the sins of the various different generations. It's primarily 4 generations who continued sinning and sinning and sinning. And by doing what they were doing, they were collapsing powerful holy energies, and sparks of holiness and goodness were falling into very, very dark places. Now, why is this? Now, this seems terrible, and it is, because what happens is these sparks, by them being in an unholy place, are feeding the evil and the corruption of the world. Because a spark is energy, holy energy, life, but the life is not expressing itself because it's trapped in an unholy husk. And so the husk is taking advantage of that spark, feeding off that spark, which doesn't belong there, and it's misusing those energies to do bad. And that's why you can end up with a world that is very ungodly, like the world was for the first few thousand years. So this is the concept of Shanaflu B'Klippas. Be'esa Shvira. So he says there were 2 times that they fell. The original collapse was even before God creates the world. When it says on the first day of creation, the earth was chaotic and empty. According to mystical tradition, this is referring to the Shvira of the world of Tohu, the shattering of the world of Tohu. But there's another shattering, as we said earlier, after Adam ate from the tree of knowledge. Adam and Eve, when they ate, that was an enormous feeding of the unholy. They fed the snake and all the armies of the snake, which are all the demons in the world, those satanic forces. And then Adam didn't stop because Adam fell into a deep depression. And when he fell into a deep depression, because he wanted to fix, and he was morbid about how terrible he messed up the entire creation, in order to rectify, he chose to become celibate, to become separated to disconnect from his wife and to live in isolation. Now, the human being has just been created, and human sexuality is very powerful. Living without his wife, he was brought to sin, in which he was omitting the same sin that is mentioned this week in the parasha later with the children of Yehuda, in which he was emitting these potent energies, to procreative energies, but it was not to his wife. And according actually to some mystical traditions, he was with this demonic female demonic force. I don't want to say her name, that was extracting these sparks from him. Obviously doesn't mean that he was with a physical human. It could have been she was just in his imagination. But this is so in other words, his form of rectification of thinking is going to rectify it by not having his union with Chava, with Eve, and trying to be holy, backfired. And for 130 years, he kept at this. This was the first 130 years. And he poured and poured and poured these powerful, and since Adam was the collective soul of all of the souls, and every time he emitted the seed, he was literally ripping souls from their source and throwing them into the dark forces. And the sins that the people sinned, they transgressed the word of God. Now, it started with Adam. The next generation was the generation of, actually it says that they were that these sparks, these souls, kind of were reincarnated in bodies in the generation of Enosh, which was like 2-3 generations after Adam. And they began to serve idols, which means in other words, instead of having an ability to rectify, they continued an impure type of a life. And God had to destroy a third of humanity, as the sages tell us. So then God didn't give up on these souls. He reinserted them in this world 2-3 generations later, in the generation of preceding Noah and Noah's generation. So these then now became the humans that were alive. These were constantly being recycled. The ancient humans came down a few times just in that 1,000 years. Now they were recycled in the generation of the flood. And as we know, they were awesomely corrupt, which means instead of again fixing, they continued their fall. Then God brought them back again and had them live in the land of Israel in the 5 cities of Sodom and Amorah. And they still couldn't get a grip of the klipa that has seeped into them. They couldn't overpower the Yetzer Hara, and again they continued their sins and their corruptions. So you have 4 generations who propagated, if you might say, Adam Harishon's sin. Kigoyin, as he says, Daira Mabel, the generation of the flood. The Dair HaFlaga. I'm sorry. What is included over here also before the generation of Sodom is also the generation of the dispersion. That was after the flood. And then Sodom. Enosh v'Anshe Sodom. So these are the 4 generations. Enosh is the first. It starts with Adam, but Adam is not counted over here because he's above it all. He was the first. He was the first collapser of the energy. But in terms of humanity, he's like above. But in terms of people, a collective society, it was these generations: Enosh, Mabel, Haflaga, and Sodom. If you see there is in different Seferim, it brings a remez. King David says, "B'demasi with my tears, arsi my bed, amse I soak my bed with tears." Now the word amse is Aleph is Enosh, Mem is Mabel, Samach is Sodom, and Hey is Haflaga. This is a remez, says the Arizal, I think, or the Megala Amukais, of the 4 generations who all tears are shed for in order to fix what they've dispersed and messed up with. And so too, now, there is the main primary collapse, but then there was continuation through every generation. The wicked in every generation. And so too the continued sparks that fall in every generation through the deeds of the wicked. So how's it fixed? So the way it's fixed is through exile. Because when the Jewish people are under the domain of that particular nation, and they get challenged both physically through various different persecutions and spiritually, they drain the energies of these hosting nations. In other words, they go after those sparks of holiness that are there and rectify those sparks. In other words, bring those sparks, shatter and break the impure husks that are on them, allowing the inner light to shine. And one of 2 things happen. Either those energies become incorporated in the Jewish people, or the Gentiles themselves get rectified to live a godlier existence, a more God-conscious existence. So these are the 2 ways in which these sparks are elevated. When the Jewish people find themselves under the domain of a nation, which inflict them with any type of infliction. The Orach Chaim says it's like, why, if a nation inflicts the Jewish people, why are they transmitting to them their energies? He says it's like a bee. When a bee stings, the bee dies. In other words, the bee is kind of stinging, but giving it certain types of wasp. I'm not sure all types of bees, but there's certain bees that they give a sting and then they drop dead. So that's the way it works, is that the klipa, when it hurts and it harms and it causes a pain to when the Nazis did what they did to the Jewish people, they emptied out, who even knows how many sparks of holiness they were extracted in that moment, in that powerful these are deep divine secrets. It's hard to know exactly. When Mashiach will come, we will then see all of this, what happened, whether it was the Inquisition in Spain, whether it was the Crusaders, whether it was all the other pogroms. Throughout all the times, all this infliction and all this suffering is not in vain, but there's some kind of a rectification in the world that's taking place. But the main thing is that the Jewish people remain steadfast in their faith in God, notwithstanding their persecution. The Torah, and they still cleave to the Torah. That's an elevation. Through this, they extract what they swallowed from their mouth. These are the sparks. And when the amount of sparks that are buried in that particular country, people, or society, or whatever it is, then the Jewish people move on from that particular ghetto, from that particular enslavement, and they move to a different country. Like we see, if you look at the history of the Jewish people, we were constantly in a state of migration throughout our long, treacherous exile history. When is the time up? When were the Jews forced out of Spain? When Spain had nothing left in their reservoirs. So there was no point of Jews being there. So Jews had to move into Poland and to Morocco and to other places. So because these vacuuming powers needed to go vacuum a different mess. and pick up the holy sparks that are in another place. Rather, let's call it go treasure hunting elsewhere. From under that particular nation. And what happens with that country? As long as the Jewish people are in that country and they have the sparks of holiness, actually when the Jews are there, there's even more energy, time than the nation had from the initial sparks that fell their way from the beginning of time. But when the Jewish people are there, they add more life. And that's why that nation where the primary bulk of Israel is, the Jewish people are, happens to be very successful. But after this extraction, the nation loses its energies and get drained, and they remain like Spain, never made it back as an important player on the world scene. In the 1200s, in the 1300s, 1400s, they were a mighty empire. Once the Jews were sent out from there, began the demise of the Spanish kingdom. And so it is country after country. Because its energy has been extracted. And when this extraction or this elevation from the entire world will be completed, then Mashiach will rise, our righteous Messiah will rise. And like the Rebbe told us, that we've already completed the work of elevating all the sparks. So we're already living in Mashiach times. The Elyon and the supernal freedom will then come down. In other words, we will then attain the highest level of supernal freedom and liberty. Hamuflig la'ol mayad, and that will last forever, kenoida, as it is known. So that's the story of the exile in a nutshell. Hine Mitzrayim. Now, we know that Egypt had the greatest deposit of misguided sparks, of fallen sparks. They were rich, like you have certain countries that are enormously rich in minerals. The Egyptians were the wealthiest country, and out of all peoples throughout all of history, they were the wealthiest country in spiritual godly minerals that was embedded in the Egyptian empire. And that's why they were so powerful. And they were like the whole machers in ancient times. In every aspect of life, they were the dominant people. But they were also the most corrupt. And Mitzrayim is the place that is the most impure, Shabachal Olam, that's in the entire world. We find that God says, I will take you up. Shahaya Nikra, Egypt was called, Yosef says to the brothers, you came to see the nakedness of the land. Now, erva doesn't mean nakedness, but erva also means the genital of a person is called erva. So Egypt represents that element of the human every part of the world is like Israel is the heart of the world or the brain of the world, and each country is a different limb. Like you can look at planet Earth also in the form of a human, and each part of the world has a different life force. And Egypt, we find, is called the erva. Now, what does that mean? What does that imply? First of all, we know that the second to the most powerful, energetic, probably area in a human being where most energy is experienced is in the head and in the reproductive element of the person. That's where there's such intensity. So we can understand why the Egyptians had enormous intensity. And they were particularly corrupt when it comes their immorality. Their state of sexual perversion was off the charts. It was like the most corrupt sexual place where there was they were totally like on steroids, like completely messed up. And therefore we find immediately when our forefather Abraham walks there, he has to hide Sarah. And you see that it was so powerful that they managed even to grab Sarah Imenu, our mother Sarah, and take her for impure purposes to Pharaoh's palace. It was only miraculously that Hashem protected her, which we see that they had an enormous seduction power. It's these energies that fell there. And as we're going to see, Yosef was going to be as well tested. The only person, where is the place of test? When it comes to a sexual perversion, the place is Egypt. But it's not only that it was this particular um, 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 challenge and corruption that was there, it was because they had the biggest deposit of sparks of holiness that fell there. And that probably doesn't say that explicitly, but it makes sense based on the idea that besides the head and the brain, the next most active, potent, powerful energy in a human being is what we call in Chassidus Yesod. Yesod is the place of bonding, the place of reproductive, and this way you create new life. It's enormously powerful. The Noidad is known, Kol Masha Ba'adam Yeshna Ba'aretz. The Midrash says in Koheles that everything that there is in a human being, you have in the earth. So a human has eyes. There are certain places in the world that are called the eyes of the world. Maybe Israel. Einei Hashem Elokecha, but the eyes of God are in the land. Okay. Umitzrayim, and a human has feet and soles of the feet, and a heel and toes. There are places in the world that represent these things. Umitzrayim makam erva, and Mitzrayim is the place of the erva. And that's where most sparks of, and you see, it's interesting. As I mentioned earlier, the sin that was the most prevalent by Adam itself when he sinned was the 130 years it was a sexual form of a sin. And over there is where you can see the most of taking powerful spiritual energies, because the power to create a child is the most powerful energy. It's life itself. And when you're not using it and putting it in the right vessel, but instead it's being directed into something impure, you're depositing powerful, potent energies and causing, you actually impregnating the unholy, giving them the power to multiply and to produce. So that's what happened in Mitzrayim. It was a very, very, very dark place. So we find that the sages tell us that the amount of sparks that fell initially were 288. That they fell in the collapse. And from the 288 that fell, and then these 288 then splinter into billions and billions. There's a mimer from the Alter Rebbe this week, where he explains exactly this concept that the number 288 is an original number, and then it becomes, that's in the world of Atzilus, but then when it falls into the world of Bria, it becomes millions, and then when it falls into Yetzirah, it becomes millions of millions, and when it falls into this world, it becomes billions of sparks, because it gets tiny and tiny, it splinters. But the general amount of sparks is 288. Egypt got the deposit of 202 from the 288. With 202 sparks. So that this is the secret. When it says that Yosef, after Yosef became king over Egypt, or the viceroy of Egypt, it says he filled the storage house and he collected grains. He had this enormous campaign to collect grain. But you think Yosef was collecting grain? He wasn't collecting grain. He was collecting sparks. The sparks was in the grain. How it says that the word that Torah used is Vayitzpar Yosef bar. Bar means grains. One of the words for tavua, for grains, other than tavua, but it says Vayitzpar Yosef tavua, which is the more common word. Why is the Torah using the word bar? Because bar has another meaning to it. Reish bet, 202. Yosef began this enormous gathering and collection of the 202 sparks. And then we know also that when the Jewish people left Egypt, it says, V'gam erev rav olu imahim, that a multitudes of people, of Egyptians and other nations went up with them. The way the Torah refers to it is erev, a mixture, rav, of many people. Rav, again, is the same word, reish beis. Then when Yaakov finds out that Yosef is alive, which word does he use? Rav od Yosef ben Ichai. It is so much, Rav, it is so much, od Yosef ben Ichai, my brother, my son Yosef is alive. Also hinting to the 202 sparks that Yosef is fixing. So you see that. Now, since they had the richest deposit, that's why the first exile of the Jewish people was to Egypt. First, we had to go to a place where we can do the most effective extraction. After we did the most effective extraction, we can continue with other places that have less. Because bang, he's using an interesting term, hit and bang. The kaftor, which it translates over here on the bottom, is the door post on the top. If you be hit with a powerful club, the doorpost or the lintel, and you give it a huge bang, it shakes the whole house. In other words, go for the main kill, go for the throat. So you go to when the Jewish people initially dive into the core of where the 286 sparks are concentrated, and you weaken them at their core, then the details will all fall apart. And therefore, like if you hit Iran, you destroy their nuclear capabilities, and the thing, you've weakened all their tentacles, right? All their proxies. And that's the reason why Egypt was so steeped in immorality. They were also into black magic. Enormous. So this is all related to these impure forces and energies. Because the space of the living, that's interesting, just living in that area, it was the land itself that was corrupting the people. Because they're breathing the air of that country. And we know when Adam sinned, God cursed the earth. So the earth became cursed, which means contaminated. And Egypt became contaminated in this particular contamination. So just walking the streets of Egypt evoked in a person immoral thoughts and desires. The place itself caused this erva. That's why. So therefore, we needed a super powerful soul to go down there and to be. It's like when a nation goes into to war, they first send in their what do they call it? When you send in a what is it called? A reconnaissance. They send in their top soldiers, maybe to go in there, sneak their way in, and to like Israel when they went in Iran had all these people there already, Shin Bet people, whatever they were there already in Mossad agents that you saw the videos the night of the attack, the surprise attack. They were launching missiles and completely dismantling their Air Force capabilities, their anti-aircraft things from within Iran. As you slip your people in there first to do a job, you weaken them, and then so we had to, before the Jewish people were able to go down as a people to clean up Egypt, we needed to send a superhero in, a mighty someone who has the particular power in that particular area in which Egypt is tested. That means a soul whose energy is the energy of Yesod, which is this level of bonding, the most holiest sexual soul. In other words, this is a soul that represents the power of bonding, the power of spiritual holy connection, which is what a holy intimacy is. But that meaning that soul can communicate in the deepest way to people. It doesn't only mean, with their own wife and so on and so forth. It means it manifests in the physical. But with other people, it's the ability to transmit and to know and to be spiritually intimate with people on the deepest level. The concept of a tzaddik. So we see, and that's why we find that when Yosef goes down to, Yosef represents, we know there are 7 tzaddikim, 7 primary tzaddikim. And Avram is chesed, and Yitzchak is Gevura, which Avram is kindness, Yitzchak is might, and Yaakov is Tiferes, which represents the torso, the holy Tiferet, and Moshe and Aaron are Netzach Yesod, which are the 2 thighs, and Yosef is Yesod, which is bonding, which is represents the the Brit Milah represents the masculine Yesod element of holiness. The divine attribute of Yesod is enclosed in Yosef's neshama. And that's why we can understand why this woman went crazy for him, his mistress, because he had a certain magnetic pull. He had that energy coming from him. But what did Egypt try to do to seduce him and bring him down? Because if Yosef, God forbid, would have been led astray and sinned, that would have been slam dunk for the klipa. I don't know if we would have ever been able to get up from that. So everything was hinging on that moment of Yosef's test. Now we know it wasn't just a moment. We know it was an entire year that she was after him. And he withstood it with superhuman powers, a 17-year-old depressed boy. I mean, he wasn't depressed, but should have been depressed. And when you're depressed, what happened to Adam? That's what happened to him. Depression leads one to engage in impure sexual conduct. So Yosef was able, even though he had all the reason to be down and to like, but yet he kept his morality up on the highest standards. So and then not only that, he paid the price. They threw him into prison for it, which means they literally drained their energy into him. But when he came out of prison after 12 years, because of his withstanding of that test, he was the magnet that you can't even imagine. The magnetic pull. That's why it says he rode out of Egypt and all the girls were like throwing him their things. Everybody wanted to marry him. And then he gets married, his Basher, Dinah's daughter, Asnas, as we know. But after that, he's able to pull the sparks. And the grand finale of it is, what does he do? In order to weaken the impure sexual lust in Egypt, you know what he does? He forces the Egyptians all to circumcise. And that's the story. In the end, they all circumcise. He asks them, he says, I'm going to give you food, but on the condition that you all circumcise. What was he doing? Because he was weakening. Rambam says that uncircumcised, one of the reasons for circumcision is that a person should weaken the sensations of the pleasure in sexual and intimacy. So the orla, the foreskin, has extra sensitivity. So by removing it, that's why the Greeks were so angry at the Jews for doing that. They forbade it, because to them everything was the body, everything was the material enjoyment. You're taking away, you're condemning that. Now in Judaism, sexuality is not condemned. It's not like Christianity. Sexuality is holy and godly, but it needs to be tempered and it needs to be directed in a holy, godly way, the way Hashem wants it. That requires that one overpowers spirit over matter, which requires one, yes, to have the experience, but where the spirit is stronger than the physical sensation. And that's why you have a bris milah. So when Yosef, that's again one of the reasons Rambam Memor Nevuchim brings in the Guide to the Perplexed. So when Yosef demands of the Egyptians to circumcise, he weakened their power of impurity, paving the way that when his brothers and the Jewish people will now land in Egypt, right after Yosef did this work, the Jewish people would be tested in Egypt with the same tests, but the Jewish people did not lose their bearings. They weren't seduced by the Egyptian women, none. And neither were the Jewish women seduced by the Egyptian men. They kept their holiness, they kept their godliness, besides one story, as the Torah says, which is astonishing, to go down to a place where everything is about that, and to be able to live there for 210 years and maintain that holiness. Without Yosef being the forerunner, they would never have been able to manage. But by doing that, they collected all these energies and absorbed it. This is really fascinating. This gives you such insight into a story of the Torah, of like what's happening over here. So Yosef needed to go first down to Egypt. Because he in holiness is the level, Madregas Oisperis Kodesh. He personifies the level of holiness of the sign of the Holy Covenant. He's the Brit of holiness. He is the reproductive element of holiness. And that's why his name is Yosef. And what does Yosef mean? Yosef Hashem li bain. Hashem should add to me a child, which means the ability of pru ervu to create children. You see it in his name. It's like you have a family. How do you make a man and a woman get married? There are two. And suddenly come back a few years later, there's 8. They made Haisafa. They added. Through what? Through their intimacy, through their union. So Yosef, his name is Lahosef, to add. It personifies really who he is. And what happened? When Yosef comes to Mitzrayim, there was never such a target. We can't even begin to imagine how all the forces of Egypt suddenly, the spiritual dark forces of perversive sexual desire came after this one person. When you begin to understand this, you understand what kind of unbelievable tzaddik Yosef is. Is like to imagine what kind of force was coming at him. Because you realize if they get him to sin, then they're safe forever. No one is ever going to be able to extract their energies. Quite on the contrary, they're going to get such a potent power now because they're going to misuse the energy of Yosef and into unholiness. I wanted to make him sin, bidvar erva, in a matter of immorality, sexual immorality. If that would have happened, the Jewish people would have remained mishukayim be'erva sa'aretz. Then the Jewish people would have sunk in the quicksand of Egypt. They would never be able to get out of there. It was only because Joseph, the hero, the holy tzaddik, the saintly Yosef, Shamar Madrigasai, guarded his level. V'amad ben Isayan, and he withstood the test. V'gadar atzma mimenu, and he safeguarded himself from sinning. Asa hachana, he did a preparation l'chol Yisrael, to all the Jewish people, sheyigdru atzma min erva, that they should be able to fence themselves off from impurity. V'nisharu nikiyim, and they all remained nikiyim, clean. V'achas hoisa, there was only one woman who we know, even that was not really, she was a little outgoing and a little bit too friendly with the Egyptian thing, and he saw her and he liked her, and accidentally, she wasn't even aware, he dragged her husband out in the middle of the night. She didn't even know about it, and he went in instead, and she thought she was with her husband. That's how, but still, there was an interaction, a sexual interaction from a Jewish woman and an Egyptian man, and this is the man that Moshe kills the next day, that Moshe cleans up this mess the next day. There's only one that the Torah publicizes. And that's the reason, because Yosef was able to retain himself and not fall, what happened to him? He rises with an incredible power immediately to the top. Because when the klipa cannot take you down, then you become the master of the klipa, the master of the unholiness. From the house of prison, Yatza Limloch, immediately he went out to be king, Ki Amad Betakvoi, and which means he ruled over the Egyptian dark forces. Ki Amad Betakvoi, because he withstood with his power. Neged HaKlipa Shel Haaretz, against these klipot of the land. Umashal Allah, and he dominated over it. The Hischel Tekev Levadet Anitzutzin, and he began immediately to rectify these sparks. Beside, that's immediately out. Vayitzpar Yosef Bar, what does he do? He starts collecting the grains, which we said earlier, bar is 210. These are these sparks of holiness, not 210, 202. And he weakened the power of the nakedness of the land. And how did he weaken them? That's what I told you earlier. He had them circumcised. When he commanded them to circumcise. As it is known. Okay. Now, by the way, it's interesting. What is left over for the rest of the world to fix after the exile of these super sparks that later splinter into billions of sparks, but the super sparks that we extracted from Egypt, which were 202, what's left over afterwards? Altogether is 388, 86. And that's the significance of this year, 57, 86. We've definitely, without a question, the Rebbe told us already 30 years ago, we've elevated all the sparks, but if it has to reveal itself, it for sure can reveal itself right now that all sparks have been completely elevated from the rest of the world. The 86 left over that we took thousands of years to pick up is in our pocket already. You know, Shemidas Yosef, it is known that the attribute of Yosef is Yesod Olam. He is the foundation of the world. And by the way, You can see Yosef. I'll share with you another interesting secret. Yosef is, the Rebbe's father says this in many places. Yosef is the numeric value 156. The numeric value of Yosef is 156. And his, which is equals 6 times the tetragrammaton, 6 times Havaya. Why 6? Because Yesod is the 6th emotion. Chesed of the emotions. Chesed, Gevurah, Teferes, Netzach, Chod, Yesod. So in his name, the gematria of his name is 6 times. He represents the 6th level, 6 times the tetragrammaton. Because the tetragrammaton is the numeric value of the Hebrew letters are 26. 26 times 6 is 156, is Yosef. It's unbelievable. And more than that, Yosef, second. Yesod. Is gematria pay 80? What's with Yosef in 80? There's something about Yosef connected to 80, which I'm slipping my head now. And Yesod is gematria 80, and 80 is related. Okay, right now it's missing it. Okay. This is the foundation of the world. And by the way, it's connected to our millennium now, because we're in the 6th millennium. And that's why the tzaddikim, from the Baal Shem Tov and onward, they are Yosef's energy. And that's why it's the first time in history that these tzaddikim, from the Baal Shem Tov and on, had such an attraction. It's the holy yesod. It's the holy bonding. You never had that in Jewish history where there was bonding with a tzaddik. There was a tzaddik, and there was the people, and the people learned from him, loved him. But the bonding, because it's the Baal Shem Tov, who's the tzaddik yesod olam, and he's that energy, and he's and all of his students are all this powerful energies. It's particularly the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, his name is Yosef, comes to America. This who came to America and begins elevating all the sparks in the United States of America and starts the shlichut to find, to send people out the entire world. Same idea, to Vayitz Barbar, to pick up not the 202, but the last 86 sparks. That is only the Chabad shlichut network. It scatters all over the world to collect sparks. Everything over here is so meticulous. Everything is so perfect. And now, when there is when Yesod is healthy, when there is when a person is directing his sexual desire in a holy, godly way, then there is shalom bayis. There is peace in their home. There is harmony and peace. Because what is the real meaning of peace? Peace means when two things are, when there is a bonding of two entities. That's peace. And the main area where you need peace is between a husband and wife. These are partners for life. When there is a rectification of Yesod, then there is good harmony in the house. If, God forbid, there is a breach in one's sexual behavior, the person shouldn't think, okay, it's nothing, my spouse is whatever. It affects your relationship. It affects your love. It affects your connection. Fights break out. There's a certain negative energy that's there. So we know that shalom is related to Yesod. Hinini noisen loy, I am giving him as berisi shalom, my covenant of peace. Shalom is Yosef. He's related to Yosef. Pinchas. Pinchas was another figure who's Yesod, because Pinchas is the one who stands up against a perversion of a sexual sin. When the Jewish people, when the prince of Shimon, tribe of Shimon, goes and wants to take the Moabite girl, the Pinchas is the one who rises, and he kills both her and him. And God says, I am giving you my bris of shalom, of peace. Peace. We know that Pinchas eventually evolves into Elijah the prophet. And Elijah the prophet shows up by every Brit Milah, which is again the idea of Yesod. So everything is connected. So now we'll get an insight since bris, since a rectified yesod, a sexual repair, where everything is in the right manner and it's holy according to Torah, according to the way God wants it, then you produce the concept of shalom, of peace. Now we'll understand why Yaakov sends to Yosef and he says, Lechna, go, re'eh, and see, a shalom hatzon, shalom achecha, the peace of your brothers, the shalom hatzon, and the peace of the sheep. We'll see in a minute what that means, but you're getting it now. He's sending Yosef on a shalom mission, on a peace mission. He's the first, the Peace Corps. Yosef is going on a peace mission. On a deeper level, it was to bring about a rectification of a certain corruption that's here already from the days of Adam, and it's impacting everybody. The brothers were not perfect in this. Because none of the world, there was a lot of damage done by the first human being and then the consecutive generations. And Yosef had the power to perfect the energy of Yesod. So he's the one who's supposed to bring the ultimate peace. It's interesting. I was just thinking that the brother who attacked him more than anybody else was Shimon. Shimon and Levi, they were the ones who were the hotheads. We find that it was Shimon's descendants, the one who took the Midianite princess to cohabit with her. By that story, who Pinchas kills is Zimri ben Salui, who is the prince, the Nasi of Shevet Shimon. You see, when you're fighting the tzaddik, then there's a lack of rectification, and it shows up in his descendant many generations later that the leader of Shimon needs more tikkun. These are fascinating things. Yosef also tries to repair Shimon more than anybody else for whatever reason. He takes Shimon and he sends all the brothers back home to the father. This is before he reveals who he is, and he keeps Shimon in the dungeon. Very interesting, because Rashi says he wanted to separate him from Levi. But there's a reason. There is something over here. Puts peace in the house. Beside as Berisi Shalom. The secret of what it says by Pinchas, that he's the one who brings about the covenant of peace. Oh. Now, based on this, we're going to understand what the mission of Yaakov was. Now, not necessarily that Yaakov has any clue what he is saying. In other words, as we said earlier, the Shekhinah speaks through the mouth of a tzaddik. So the tzaddik says a sentence, and he has one level of meaning, but there's a much deeper thing being said through him that he might not even be conscious of, which Yaakov was not conscious of. But the words that he used when he sent Yosef out were words that clearly depicted exactly the tikkun that Yosef needs to do. And he said like this, we're going to preface one more Hagdama, one more introduction. The Kabbalists say that these sparks that were cast away, that was scattered from the 4 generations that we discussed earlier, the sinful generations, who continued the collapse and continued the destruction of holiness. These sparks that fell from them, their first started rectifying them, Yaakov. Avram and Yitzchak, they're only a preparation for Yaakov. It's Jacob who's going to fix it. And where did he begin their repair? These souls were reincarnated they all fell into, we said they fell into Egypt, but before these souls really emerged into Egypt, they were hanging out by Lavan. And that's why Yaakov, the first exile of the first Jewish, really we say that Egypt is the first exile, but really Yaakov going down to Haran is really the first exile of, and it goes to his uncle Lavan. and he fights to be able to build a family, but primarily then he amasses a fortune through the flocks of Lavan, the sheep of Lavan. And we see that all the work that he did, and what's amazing is he waited till Yosef was born. You got to see this. Yaakov did not be, till Yosef was born. No, I'm sorry. No. Till Yosef was born, Yaakov was not going to leave Egypt. When Yosef was born, Yaakov says to Lavan, I'm ready to leave because I have my rectifying power. And Lavan says, I want to reward you. So Yaakov says, what? Lavan says, how do I pay you? Because Lavan wanted him to stay. He thought he's going to wrestle with Yaakov and drag his energies down. Same fight. And Yaakov says, okay, I'm going to continue shepherding your sheep. And whatever has spots and speckles and are going to be mine. And he keeps on cheating him back and forth, but Yaakov manages to literally take the entire wealth of Lavan away. And it becomes, this is literally depicting the story of the Jewish people that we're going to happen there. How many years was Yaakov working with the sheep? 6 years. From when Yosef was born. 6. 6 is the number of Yisod. It's amazing. It's this avoda of collect. Now, where were the sparks? In the sheep. All those sheep were like this extraction. And Yaakov was doing whatever he can to wrestle all this away from the impure source. They were in Lavan's thing. However, even though they were rectified when they became the sheep of Yaakov, they now needed to be elevated from animal to human. These are really human souls. But they had their first rectification when they were sheep and bear. And then they had to be reincarnated again to reach their ultimate elevation. You know where they were reincarnated again? When this family of 70 went down to Egypt with their sheep, somehow their sheep went down with them to Egypt. The soul, they died the sheep or whatever was there, and these souls then came back down as babies that were born to the Jewish people, and they became the 600,000 souls. 600,000 men, which are the 600,000 root souls. Also the number 6, Yesod. This that the Jewish people were paru, verabu, and we know, what does the Torah tell us? Most that happened in Egypt was that the Egyptians tried to stop the Jewish people from procreating, having families. And because they knew that that's how the Jewish people will extract the sparks. So again, obviously you have to say, there is the sheep itself, which is the kernel of the soul, and then there's probably certain sparks that are already in Egypt from before, but it's like a collection. You collect, it's like each sheep has a counter sparks that are hanging around Egypt, and as they're, I don't know, how God manifests all of this is with infinite secrets, with infinite wisdom, and it all comes together, and it becomes a human being that is born to the Jewish people. These Jewish people are enslaved and brutally enslaved. And that's a purification. And now they all go to receive the Torah, and you have the rectification of Adam. And you have the rectification of the world. Almost complete. You still have 86 sparks to fix, but 202 are already fixed. And even just the 600,000 Jews themselves, which turned into 2-3 million when you count the women and the children, are already a transmigration of the sheep of Yaakov that now are translated into become the human species of the Jewish children that are going out of Egypt. Now we understand why Yaakov says to Yosef, go see the peace of your brothers and the peace of the sheep. What kind of peace of the sheep? What does it mean? It's because there's a rectification of peace that needs to happen both in your brothers, because they need the tikkun of Yesod, they need help, and you see in the same story that the Torah tells you how Yosef was so impeccable with his purity, with his Yehuda fails, although that too was angelic and Mashiach is born from it. I'm not going chas v'sholom. Yehuda didn't fail in that because he was a sinner. But you see, there was some kind of impurity there that he goes with a harlot, with a prostitute. It's not really a prostitute. It's it. But you see, where Yehuda fails, Yosef is the champion, because there is some that the brothers are not perfect yet in their reaching the perfection of Yesod. Yaakov, it says, was the highest human being. He got married when he was 86 or 87, something like that. And it says that he never in his life, Reuven was the first droplet that he ever. Now he's a human being with an incredible power and strength, bottled up enormous amount of energy. Who would not have a sexual desire and urge, and what you might call a transmission or something, till 86? How can that be? And Yaakov was the holiest of the holy. You realize these are super tzaddikim. This is holiness. This is like, they were embedded in the sheep of Lavan. And this was all the striving of Yaakov. He brought them to holiness. To his sheep, and they became the holy sheep of Yaakov. And that's the reason why the tribes were all shepherds. They were, again, you have to understand, they're also super tzaddikim. They're not, God forbid, they're not on the same level as Yosef, but they're also super tzaddikim. And they're shepherding the sheep, because everything, all the sparks are in those sheep, in a rectified manner. I guess they're shepherding it and so forth. They're nurturing it and empowering it and whatever. And when then later the Jewish people went to Mitzrayim, they came with all their sheep. The Nigbar Biruram, but they completed their tikkun, their elevation. Mimadreges chai lemadreges medaber. They were elevated from the state of a holy animal to become a holy human, which was an elevation. Because the animals then, the souls of these animals then were somehow transmigrated into the, or reincarnated, you might say, into the babies that are born in Egypt, and what are the Egyptians trying to do? To throw these babies into the Nile, which means to drown them in the impurities of Egypt. And that's the power struggle that happens over here. It's all about these sparks of holiness. And through this, the Jewish people had an enormous childbirth. And that's what caused Egypt to go crazy. Paru vayishritzu. They became so much. And that's why Paro also says that. He says, Hine Pharaoh, when he has a meeting, an emergency meeting with his ministers, what does he say? Hine am b'nei Yisrael Rav va'atzum. Rav, he uses the word Rav. They are much, but he uses the 202 because that's that number. And this will also understand Kiruach Hashem. And he says, and they will prevail over us, and they will go up from the land. Meaning they will, not only will they leave, but they'll take all these sparks that are here. Now we'll understand that God spoke through Yaakov. And he says to Yosef, Lechna, you go. Now watch this. Why at that moment? It's interesting, Yosef was 17 years old. And we know that 17 is Gematria Tov. And Yesod is called Tov. Imru Tzadik Ki Tov. 17, we spoke last year about the 5 17s. The 17 is the number of Tov, which Tov is particularly the energy of Tzadik Yesod Olam, the Tzadik, the foundation of the world. So Yosef was 17 years old. He's ready to do the tikkun. But more, how many years were there going to be now for the Egyptian exile? We know that the Jewish, from when Yaakov came to Egypt, they were there 210 years. However, when Yosef went down to Egypt, it was 22 years earlier. We know Yosef did not see Yaakov for 22 years. So if you take 210 plus 22, you get 232. 210 plus 22, 232. 232 is the exact numeric number of 4 times Yud Kei Vav Kei with the Miloi, the fillings of the Yud Kei. What does that mean? We know that our 4 primary um, miluyim, what we call fillings that you can fill the tetragrammaton if you include the hidden letters. There is 72, there is 63, there is 45, and 52. Depending how you fill the letters. Those who listened to classes before, I discussed this many, many times. It's called Shem Ayin Bey, Samach Gimel, Ma, and Ban. 232 is the exact, if you add up 72, 63, 45, and 52. Why? Because Yesod, 72 is Chachma, the power of Chachma. 63 is Bina. 45 is the energy of the 6 emotions. Malchut is 52. Now Yosef, because he's the Yesod, he bonds with Malchus, he receives from all the Sfirot above him, and he connects Shalom, he makes peace with his wife, with Malchus. He is the connector between the Shekhinah and all the transcendental energies. Comes out that Yosef represents all the 4 of them. So when it was exactly 232 years to be in Mitzrayim, it's when we have this power of holiness, and in the 232 there will be this powerful elevation through the attribute of Yesod to elevate all the Nitzutzei Kedusha that are in Egypt. So everything is aligned at that moment. Now Yaakov was not foretold exactly that this was going to happen. He doesn't know. He's telling his son, go out, see how your brothers are doing. But God is speaking through the holy word mouth of Yaakov. So therefore he says, the time has arrived. From this day until they went out of Egypt, 232 years. Minyan, this is the amount. The 4 fillings of the name of the tetragrammaton. That all flow to Yosef. Bris, which is the secret of the bris, of the circumcision. Vahavina will be understood. And therefore he says to him, Re'eh, go and see Eshlom Achecha. That means go give shalom, go rectify the yesod of your brothers. The way this will be rectified is by, your brothers are going to have to go down to Egypt. The sheep are going to have to go down to Egypt. We're going to need to go through this enormous amount of tests, particularly that's going to challenge us in our morality. Now, your brothers are not ready for that without you. You are that energy. You are that power. Dafka. And therefore, you have that enormous... Oh, you got me on. So you're following. You have only you have that crazy, 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 enormous power to do this tikkun, to do this rectification. And that's why he says, go see shalom achecha. Go see the shalom, the peace of your brothers. In order for them, on the second page, Taf Tzadik Zayin. Mukhrech atam mikoidam lekulam. You need to be the trailblazer. You need to be the trailblazer. Actually, 3 lines from the bottom. You need to be the trailblazer. Uletake nesmidas shalom, and to do a rectification on that attribute of peace. Darga de bris shalom. You need to fix it for all your brothers, because we know that we need a tzaddik to assist us. It's not by accident that in the last 200 years, God provided us with these big tzaddikim. And again, how's the Baal Shem Tov called? Baal Shem Tov. Tov again, Yesod. It's enormous how this happens to help the Jewish people through this tikkun in the 6th millennium, which is Keneged Yesod, which is our 6,000 years. Shalom, and he says, go check out the peace of your brothers. It's through this that you're going to be careful. You're going to fence yourself off from the erva, in the place where it's the most challenging. You're going to give the ability for the Jewish people to be able to do this rectification for your brothers. Everybody is going to follow you. If you will prevail and if you will triumph, you will The tzaddik lifts the entire generation. The entire generation, they'll struggle, they'll have ups and downs, but they'll be elevated because of the tzaddik. The gam, and that's why he also says, also go see the peace of the sheep. Shlom Atzon. Why? Because even though the sheep were already rectified, they went from Lavan's flocks and they became part of Jacob's, of Yaakov. So they were brought into holiness, but they're still on the level of animal, and they need to rise into the level of human, which gives them a much greater capacity in connecting to God. So therefore, right now, all these potent energies are incarnated in the sheep. And in Egypt, they will merit bimitzrayim, in Egypt, lalois l'madreges medaber, to ascend and to rise up to the level of human. V'gam yeh b'madreges hashalom, and they're going to be in a state of peace. Sheyeh gedurim in a erva, which means that they're going to be fenced off, and they're going to have the ability to control their impure desire. But it's also important to note, it's not just about the controlling of the impure, it's mainly about developing a holy bonding. Holy ability to connect and to bond on the deepest way with people. And Veshivani davar, and that's what he's saying. I'm sending you on this incredible peace mission. This is your job. You're beginning the rectification of the cosmos. It's a huge mission. And he says, you're going to have to come report to me on the matter. Which means I want to get a report card from you to see how you're doing. Were you successful in subduing the powerful forces in Egypt that have taken all the sexual energy and completely perverted it from these sparks of holiness? I want to see if you are able to give me back a report of how you've done in this purification, in this rectification. So what does that mean? Vashivani davar atzolay mesheshiveu l'simin oisa hadavar. That's what he says. Vayeshevenu davar. Give me back exactly this matter. What I want from you is a report card on this. At the time that he will reveal himself to the brothers in Egypt, and the next phase of the tikkun is going to begin. That what? That the rest of the family is going to go down to Egypt. I want to hear from you how you paved the road. Answer me regarding this matter. Yishlach loy simin. Before we will continue, all of us descending, send me a sign that we are, give me a thumbs up, give me a sign that we're ready to go. Yishlach loy simin oisa hadibur abatzmi. Send me back exactly these words. That he commands him to go see the peace of his brothers. That you should conduct yourself in a holy manner. L'sham, when you're there. And then you're going to be the tzaddik yesod olam. You're going to be, and therefore you're going to have the incredible power of peace. La'achiv, to their brother. In general, we know, again, as I mentioned earlier, a house where there is a lot of quarreling is usually an indication that there's not such that there is a pagam in the sexual elements in the house. That's number one. Number two, people that quarrel a lot, and there's a lot of an environment. They go into this. There's tikkunim that has to do in the element of yesod. I'm not saying it's always the cause, but a lot of time, a lot of fighting and quarreling has to do with this, because when there's a lack of peace, yesod brings an aura and an energy of peace. Rectified yesod. Now, Vayigash, and maybe that could be the reason they were quarreling before with Yosef. There was a lack of peace. There was this tension because it was not yet completely nisaken. So he tells him, go piece it out now. Go you. No. Now, did Yosef do this? Did Yosef send back to Yaakov exactly the mission that Yaakov told him to do? So he does exactly that. Why? He says to it. Now, first of all, he doesn't mention this. But you know what Rashi says? That when he reveals himself to his brothers, they weren't sure it's him. They were thinking, how can it be? This guy was like such a power. Huh? So Rashi says, he told them, come close. And Rashi says, it means that he showed them that he was circumcised. Which, by the way, is a question. He had told everybody to circumcise. But the circumcision of everybody else was before the brother. It happened after the brothers came down. At this point, I'm not sure if he had already, but and probably the showing of the circumcision was not that he was technically circumcised. He probably was able to show them the holiness that he. But you see that was the simon. But even more so, he then, when he sends to his father, what's the message? He tells his father like this. He's going to now be very, very perfect in the reading in Parshas Vayigash. Yes. Right now we were reading, the psukim we were reading right now was Perek Lamed Zayin. The psukim we were reading now was Perek Lamed Zayin. Pasuk Yudalid. And the psukim that we are going to read now is in Parshas Vayigash. We're over there. Yosef says, "Go up to my father. Maru valu al avi. Rush up and go up to my father. Vamartem elav, and say to my dad, Koi Omar bincha Yosef. So says your son Yosef." In other words, he is giving them words. Now, I understand. Why does he have to give them words? He can let them go up and tell them the story. Look at this guy. He's look what happened. We found Yosef. But he doesn't do that. He tells them, Ko Amar, you better say exactly these words. He puts the words in the mouth. Samani Elokim. In other words, they should quote him. Not that they should tell him about him. They should actually quote Yosef. And that would be the opening sentence that Yosef will tell to his father. What was that opening sentence? God placed me a master over Egypt. Bingo. As soon as Yosef delivers that message, Yosef now fulfilled what his father told him 22 years ago. Go out and see the peace of your brothers and the peace of the sheep. Because for Yosef to become the master of Egypt means that Egypt, with all of its sexual perversion, was not able to drag him down. Because if he would have sinned, they would have had complete power over him. The fact that not only the fact that he became the ruler over all of Egypt, that everybody listens to him and he dominates over them, to the point where he had them circumcise themselves. That's how domineering he was, is a clear indication that he affected this effect of Yesod to the highest level. And that's the reason he's telling his brothers, say these words to Yaakov, because I heard the words from the holy tzaddik that Shechina was speaking through it. Yosef realizes that when a Rebbe talks, it's not Stam talking. He says he meant Bazai, and he said Azai, and when a Rebbe talks, especially a Rebbe like Yaakov Avinu, the tzaddik, the leader of the generation, who the Shechina speaks through his mouth, his words, every word is absolute emet. It's absolute truth. And the Shechina is speaking. Yosef has no choice. He was given a mission. It took 22 years. Now he comes back and he gives over, as father said, Vashivenu davar, return to me this matter that I'm sending you about, to go and find out the peace. The peace is Yesod. Shalom is Yesod. Go find out the peace of my brothers and the peace of the sheep. Yosef gave exactly that answer. That's what he's going to develop over here. And now Yosef says the next line, come down, don't stay. In other words, because I've done already the tikkun, now you can all come. Right now, the reason the rest of the brothers are coming down, the rest of the Jewish people, it's just cleanup. It's like the main job was done already. Now you just got to come in here and finish the tikkunim. But you have the power to do so because I've already laid the foundation. So let's read it inside of here. You can see in Parshas Vayigash, he says to his brothers, Alu al Avi, go up to my father Amar Temelov and say to him, Koyamar bincha Yosef. So says, there's copies here. So says your child Yosef, Samani Elokim. See, Yosef had to come today. Samani Elokim la'odain l'chol Mitzrayim. The Eibishter made me, it's the third page. The Eibishter made me la'odain l'chol Mitzrayim, to a master over Egypt. According to the simple meaning, kasha ma'oid, very, very hard to understand. Why does he tell them sheyoimru kain bishmai? They should say it in his name. And he didn't tell them kipshutai. He could tell them alu el avi, go to my vamartem elav. Tell him that Hashem made me a ruler. What does he have to say? Say ko amar bincha Yosef. So you have to quote me, because he needed to actually say those words to Yaakov. He made them the agents to say those words that Yaakov told him. Well, based on what we said earlier, it's going to become sweet. Midvash, sweeter than honey. The noifes tzufim, and more delightful than candy. When Yaakov said to him, Hazeh, Yaakov was prophesizing. And he didn't know what he was saying. The famous story of Label Groner relates that there was once a person who went to, his son was going to Israel. And he came to the previous Lubavitch Rebbe, Yosef Yitzchak, and he asked him about the trip. And his father and the Friedrich Rebbe told him that he should not go on the boat. He shouldn't go. He should delay his trip. And in the end, the boy didn't listen, and he went on the trip, and that ship sunk. The boy passed away. The father came back with enormous tinus, with enormous complaints. He said, "I lost my son," and obviously the Rebbe knew. Why couldn't he tell me that there's something very dangerous? I would have made sure my son does not go on that ship. So the previous Rebbe said, "I don't know. No, I had no idea that the ship is going to sink. But if we say, mir zagen, if we say, darf man folgen," he said in Yiddish, if we say something, you have to listen. Because I don't have to be conscious about what I'm saying. But if it's coming out of my mouth, you have to listen. It's exactly this point that we're learning over here. The words of a real tzaddik is God speaking through his mouth. So he doesn't have to be conscious even what he's saying. It's a hamshacha coming through him that is purely divine. And Yosef, however, as a chassid of his father, knew that. So when he for 20 years, he was bothered by the fact, Yosef, that his father said something and he couldn't fulfill it. But the moment he realized what was really said and what he was able to do, he immediately, the first time he was able to do so. He's going to say later he wasn't able to do it so earlier. And he's going to ask a question at the end. Everybody asked the question, why didn't Yosef send a messenger to his father? The only thing, when he was sold as a slave. So number one, he was right away appointed as the manager of the estate. The manager of the estate, he couldn't send him a FedEx. Go out there, send them a letter, and they had letters that carried it. So, and then, okay, when he was in prison, I understand. But when he was there, he had the ability to and then later, especially all the years that he was king, why didn't? So in addition to that they made a cherem, they excommunicated anybody that would say, and they took the Shekhinah along, say he wasn't allowed to. But in addition to that, he says, because Yosef was told by Yaakov, come back and report to me when you're ready to report on this matter. And I want to report. That's when you're coming back. After you completed the shlom achecha v'shlom hatzon, after you completed this tikkun of Yesod for your brothers and for the sheep, which were all gilgul of love on sheep, of the nitzutzes of all these generations that messed up, only when you're going to then give me back. The completion of that tikkun was when Yosef had all of Egypt circumcised. And Yosef only had all of Egypt circumcised in the second year of the famine, the year that Yaakov came down. So Yosef couldn't even answer the davar until he was able to say, I am full master, so much master that not only did they not pervert me, I elevated Egypt to be less perverted than they were before. Because the circumcision causes that a certain cleanliness, a certain upgrade in the morality of Egypt. Yaakov said in Nevuah, he didn't even know what he was prophesying. When it happened, Yosef understood that the words of God spoke in his father. And he understood this that he commanded him, answer me something. He should send him a sign. That exactly that he's seeking. So that Yaakov should be able to come down to Egypt without the worry that Egypt is going to completely destroy him and his family. So he needed to know that Yosef completed his initial reconnaissance mission. That his children should not become entrenched in Egypt and never be able to get out of there, God forbid. In the nakedness of the land. That's why Yosef had to fulfill it. And therefore he said, so says your son Yosef. He was now fulfilling the burach. Your words, this that he commanded him, you have to answer me on this matter. And what's the sign? Samani Elokim la'adain l'chol Mitzrayim. Egypt did not master me. I am mastered over Egypt. Umemele tavin, you will understand. Shehinini roya es shalom achi. So now you will know that I have already brought about the peace, which, because we said earlier, Yesod is called peace. The shalom atzayin, and the peace of the sheep. I did not become enslaved to that immoral force that was in Egypt. And on the contrary, in his gabarti, all of I prevailed over it. And that's why I merited to become the ruler, and to become a domineering force over them. Because if these klipot I would have allowed them to seduce me, then what? He would never have risen. He would have been subdued by Egypt forever. Instead, he was able to this that he was able to rise. Take of Yaakov, and as soon as Yaakov heard this, then Yaakov understood what Yaakov himself said. In other words, Yaakov now reanalyzed his words, and Yaakov was also bothered that he spoke words, because a tzaddik knows that when he says something, it's holy. And for 22 years, Yaakov was disturbed. I sent my son, I said to him words, and it wasn't fulfilled. Yosef died, and he's never returning to me. How can I have said you will return and go see the peace? That never happened. So he's going to say now, that's the meaning of V'tchi Ruach Yaakov Aviyam. Yaakov suddenly became enlivened. It's not only in general that he was happy. It was these sentences, this last conversation was now suddenly enlivened by Yaakov. Yaakov was perplexed by his words that fell flat, and he didn't understand it because he knew that he's a markava to the Shekhinah. So he couldn't understand how his words fell flat and did not accomplish what needed to be accomplished. But now V'tchi Ruach, we know speech is called Ruach. Ruach Memalala, the speak. So that Ruach was now enlivened. Yaakov says, so the words were fulfilled exactly. And that's why it says afterwards, they spoke to him, Eskol Divrei Yosef. All the words of Yosef, Asher Diber Aleim, that he spoke to them. Again, in Parshas Vayigash, it continues. After it says they said this to him, it says they went. Yosef told them to say this. Then it says they came, and they said to Yaakov all the words of Yosef that Yosef. In other words, they also knew they have a mission, and they didn't come to Yaakov and then say, "Oh, by the way, Yosef is doing great." They remembered to do it exactly like Yosef told them, which means they said, "So said Yosef, I am the master over Egypt." Because if without this, it seems to be superfluous. The Hevelei Lamemer Bekitzer, it could, because in the end it says what they said. In the end it says what they said. So if that's the case, why does it say they spoke to him the words of Yosef? Yeah, it says right afterwards. The Hevelei Bekitzer, Vayadabru Esasher Diber Aleim Yosef. They spoke what Yosef spoke to them. Mahu Kol Divrei Yosef, all the words of Yosef. Achul Rabbi Sha'imru Hadvarim Kiksavai. Kol means they said it accurately and exactly like he gave it to them. Hainu Koi Omar Yosef, so said Yosef. Even Yaakov, then Yaakov understood. So Yaakov understood the desirable thing. And this is the meaning. That Yaakov comes alive. Until then, the words that God spoke through him and in him was not alive in him. It felt dead. It felt heavy, those words. Because, as I said earlier, it was flat. It seemed to be words that were dead. He didn't know what they were about. When now he remembered and he contemplated those words, the spirit of Yaakov, he understood the words that he himself uttered, that his words are alive and eternal. And this will also understand. So it's interesting. If you look at the verses over here, you see that Yaakov speaks twice to Yosef. First it says, Vayoyme Yisrael el Yosef, Haloi achecha royim v'Shechem. Your brothers are shepherding in Shechem, or pasturing in Shechem. L'chavesh l'chacha aleim. I will send you to go, and I will send you to them. Vayomer lo hineni. He says, I'm ready. Then he continues, Vayomer lo, he adds another statement. But this time it doesn't say who said. It says he said. Now, everybody learns it. Who said? Yaakov says. Because you mentioned him earlier. But if Yaakov is saying, then why do you have to say Vayomer? Just continue what he said. It says Vayomer, it means Vayomer lo, maybe because Yosef said Hineni, so now Yaakov is continuing. But he says, Lech no re'eh shloim achecha. He's going to explain that the first time when Yaakov was speaking, was Yaakov speaking. Yisrael was speaking. It didn't have that potency. It has the potency of a tzaddik, but not necessarily on that level. The second time, and he said to him, that's the Shekhinah speaking in Yaakov's mouth. That's when suddenly it was upgraded to pure prophecy. Yaakov's mouth was then upgraded to pure prophecy. That's why he doesn't say was not that didn't have such a cosmic message, as we shall see. Yeah, where we all over here. Yeah. Yaakov did not say to him, I'll send you to them. Yaakov could have said it right away. I'll send you to them. Yaakov could have said it right away. I'm sending you to them to see the peace. And answer me. Because then later he did say that. Why does he wait till Yosef answers him in Nani and then first it says Israel says to Yosef. This is Yaakov speaking. Very holy, but it's Yaakov. It wasn't the moment where the Shekhinah needed to speak through him. Because the first part was able to be fulfilled right then and there. Why? I'm sending you to your brothers. That was fulfilled. Yosef went to the brothers. But go check out their peace was not fulfilled now. That's going to be a prophetic, and that has a much deeper meaning. For that, Yaakov has to be a separate communication coming through God speaking through Yaakov, the Shekhinah speaking through Yaakov. But when it came to the end, Hashem took over Yaakov's mouth. Hashem intercepted Yaakov's tongue. I love that. And because this was not able to be fulfilled. It says he said to him, it doesn't say who said. Stop. It doesn't say Yaakov said or Israel said. The Shekhinah spoke the right words, the proper words, that was going to be fulfilled after time. And understand this really, really well. These teachings that I'm teaching you are deep, and sweeter than honey. Now you can see further. Now he's going to translate also the interaction with Yosef and Gavriel, and when he's in the field, he's looking for them and so forth. Where are my brothers? So this is going to be less Kabbalistic. This part over here, less, just more on the simple shot, but it flows along very much with what we were learning earlier. And he says like this. And the Torah uses the words perfectly. Yaakov says to Yosef these words. The opening words that he says as Yaakov. What does he say? Your brothers are pasturing in Shechem. Let me go and send you to them. At first glance, why does he have to say your brothers are shepherding in Shechem or pasturing in Shechem? He could have said, first of all, everybody knew they were in Shechem because it says the brothers went to Shechem. And probably the family knew that's where the pasturing fields were. And you could say that Yosef didn't know, but it's quite possible that when they left as a whole group, that they knew where the location was. It seems that he asked to let them know and knew, as if no one knows that they were in Shechem. It seems like everybody knew to all the members of the household. Because it says earlier, it says the brothers went out to pasture the fields in Shechem. So who says it was a secret? The pashtus, the simple level. Everybody knew. They notified it, to the rest of the household, to their wives, to their family, where they're going. They're packing up their lunch for 3 days. They're camping here. They're going out. They let them know where they're going. They're going to Shechem. So Yosef probably also knew. Yaakov could have said it just bekitzer. Let me send you to your brothers. Or even if he doesn't know, go, I will send you to the brothers to Shechem. Why does he have to make an introduction? Your brothers are pasturing in Shechem. The reason why it was said this way is because he's a tzaddik, and his words must, Hashem guards the tzaddik that shouldn't, God forbid, say a word that's not going to be fulfilled. And Hashem put the words in Yaakov, words that could be fulfilled. It's interesting. Even the words that were not Shekhinah speaking through him, there too Hashem is making careful that Yaakov should say the words correctly. Because God knew that he's not going to find them in Shechem. God knew that they were going to go to a place called Dosan, like actually happened. The brothers went initially to Shechem, and then they left Shechem and they went to Dosan. If Yaakov would say to the brothers, I'm sending to your brothers in Shechem, then Yaakov would have said something that would not have been fulfilled. Because Yosef did not meet the brothers in Shechem. So Hashem orchestrates the words that Yaakov states a fact. They are shepherding in Shechem. That's true, because they were shepherding in Shechem. They initially were in Shechem. Then they said, the Malach says, I heard them saying, let us go to Dosan. They were nasu mizeh. They left here. They were here just till a few hours ago. They were here. And just now, they were earlier, and I heard them saying, let's go somewhere else. So Yaakov's words were correct. Yaakov says, you go, I'll send you to them. And that happened. But to them doesn't necessarily mean in Shechem. To them. And Yosef does arrive to them, but not in Shechem. So you see, every word ends up being true. Now your brothers are in Shechem. Let it be wherever they will be. Which wouldn't be the case if he would have said to them, go to Shechem, that's where they're pasturing. Then part of Yaakov's words would not reach fulfillment. And then another thing would happen. If Yaakov says to him, go see your brothers at Shechem, and Yosef goes to Shechem and the brothers are not there. So Yosef has all the right now. He fulfilled. His father said, I'm sending you to your brothers in Shechem. If the brothers are not there, what is he going to do? They're not in Shechem. So he has no business anymore continuing searching for them. But Yosef heard his father's words so carefully. His father says, your brother are in Shechem. That's just telling him where they are. I'm sending you to them, wherever. So, in other words, you better go out. He understood it now. He didn't necessarily understand that his father intended this, but he had this reverence to the holy words of his father, knowing that his father says something, it is. So when his father said, I will send you to them, he continues his search. He knows he has to reach them. That's a must. But in this verse, he doesn't say, go and check out how they're peace, because in the end, Yosef never did that. He never got to ask them how they're doing. The peace, that never happened, but he was sent to them, and he went, as we're going to see. He came to Shechem and he didn't find them. Va'oz darash, and then Yosef went back to the holy words of his father. He must go to find them wherever he will find them. I love this because if anybody knows a little bit about the Hasidic world, the Hasidim of the Baal Shem Tov and these great tzaddikim, when the Rebbe said something to them, even if it made no sense at all, it was totally sounded like, okay, he made a total mistake. They never treated it that way. I mean, they always knew that even it's absurd. What, I got to fulfill it to the T. And the miracle always happens when they fulfill it in the most absurd situation, when they do what they didn't want, and that's where it happens, the wonder. So you have it in this case as well. And see how the Eibishter, God, who is the one who causes all causes, made that Yaakov's words should be accurately fulfilled. And what this will understand afterwards. A man meets him and he is bludgeoning. He is lost. He is confused. He is seems to be wandering, looking right. And he's in the field. Why does it say that he looked like he was lost? A man meets him and Yosef says, where's my brothers? Well, what's the emphasis that he was lost? The word toa means confused. What's confused? You don't find him. There's no confusion. But he was confused because he knew his father said something and he was trying to figure that out, that it has to be fulfilled, as we'll see in a minute. Another thing you understand, why did Yosef end up being lost? And the man asked him, and it says the man asked him saying, it says the man asked him, what are you seeking? That's what it says. The man asked him, what do you seek? It says, the man asked him saying, what's the saying? I'm seeking my brothers. Please tell me where they are. What does he have to say, my brothers, I am searching? He could have said very bekitzer. He could have said very, very, in a very short. Yeah, you heard it. You came here from hearing it. Sometimes I get panicked that it has to be connected. Okay. He had to say to him in short, why does he have to say, I'm looking for my brothers, tell me where they are? He could say, he said, what are you looking for? I'm looking for my brothers. Tell me where they are. Huh? Tell me where they're pasturing. That's it. The man says they traveled from here. There's another question. He says they left here. What did you have to say they left here? I don't care where they left here. Ish is a man, but Rashi says he's Gabriel. It's an angel who's dressed like a person. Who's now in. So now Gabriel says to him, Nosum is that they left here. Who cares if they left here? The main thing is, where did they go? Tell me where they are. He could have said, they went to Dosan. That's it. Why is the angel saying they left here? They traveled from here. He sees that they're not here. That he sees. He should have just said, Shamati, I heard they're going to Dosan. Based on this, we'll understand it perfectly. When Yosef saw they're not in Shechem, he right away got very perplexed. So he reread his father's words, and he said, but his father said, I should send them to them. So he knows he has to get to them. If they're not in Shechem, he's still sending him. Oh, but he told them in Shechem, so now he's confused. So Yosef thought, Shechem can mean the city. Shechem can also mean all the fields around the city. So it could be he arrived, he came to the inside of Shechem, to the middle of the city. He doesn't see his brothers over there. He figured he's going to go to the local luncheonette. They're sitting there grabbing a bite. They're in the local coffee shop, and they're having a coffee. That's what he thinks. He comes to Shechem, they're not there. So then he says, oh, they're not in Shechem. So he starts, so he starts running around all the fields. He's feeling, his father said they're in Shechem, they got to be in Shechem. So if they're not in Shechem, they're in the vicinity, around, which could still be considered Shechem. Okay. He was bothered, his father says to him, they're in Shechem. They're not here. Okay, Shafat. He concluded. Maybe they are shepherding in the fields, and in the outer areas, in the suburbs. Hashaychem l'Shechem, that are still part of Shechem, but they're not Shechem itself. And that's how my father's words will be correct. It doesn't say he came l'Shechem. It's a Shechema. Shechema means he came to town square. He came into the city. When he saw they're not there, he starts moving around in all the vicinities of Shechem. How many times do you have the chassid, the Rebbe sends him to stop in a town, go to that, and he goes there, and he starts walking on the streets. He doesn't know what. He knows every day he has to walk on the streets. What in the world he's doing in this town? What is he doing? I have stories with Yossel Weinberg like that. They're like crazy stories. He's walking like days, not knowing. He knows if I have a shlichus here, something's got to happen. I have to be here. And then after a few days, boom, something amazing takes place. In any case, When he didn't when he didn't see them in the fields, Gamkein as well, Hayataya. Now this already started perplexing him. He's confused. Confused means because he knows his father's words have to be true. But he's perplexed. He got a little confused in his research. While he's in the field. In other words, he's reading deeply into his father's words. His father said, no more in Shechem. Go, I'm sending you to them. But in the beginning he said they're in Shechem. So I thought to reconcile the two, that they're in Shechem, but I'm sending you to them, which means search them out anywhere in Shechem, even in the outskirts. But now he can't reconcile it that way. So he's trying to figure it out. They're in Shechem. You could have answered, they're at the boundaries of Shechem. But now when he passed through all the Gevulim, all the boundaries of Shechem, you can see Yosef walking around the city. He's walking. They're not around the city and they're not in the field. Now this started perplexing. Definitely his father's words are true. That's why the emphasis is the man meets him and he is perplexed. The Torah wants to tell you that Yosef is seeking to fulfill exactly what his father told him. So that's why he can look at him and he sees that this guy seems to be lost in his mind. He's tall, he's wondering. And it says bisada in the field, because he's already checked out all the surrounding fields. The man asks him, Lamar, what's that? He basically says to him, Lamar. The man is asking him on his father's lamar, on his father's amira, what your father said to you. Matavakish, what else are you seeing? You checked everything out. Looks like your father's words are now. Are you still going to squeeze this lemon any further? Well, what do you want to do now? Yeah, it's kind of a test. It's like he's seeing to see how determined he is. You've already fulfilled the mimer, the teaching. You came to Shechem. So what does he answer? I'm seeking my brothers. Why? Because if I can't figure out the Shechem part. You know what? I'm perplexed. He says, you're right. I don't know what to do with my father's words. But one thing is for sure. The second half of what my father said, I should go to my brothers. Maybe they're not in Shechem. I don't know. But I'm looking for my brother. I have to get to them. That's why he emphasized, it's let me fulfill what I want. And then I'll one day maybe understand what was doing with Shechem. He didn't say the Shechem. However, we're going to figure out what my father said. Because here's the thing, you can sit there and perplexed, but you got to do whatever you're able to fulfill the part that you do understand. So in the that's awesome. Now we'll understand why the Malach says to him, they were in Shechem. Oh, wait, sorry. No, he's thinking about what Yaakov's beginning words, when Yaakov said, and that didn't happen. Al Kain, so he says, I'm looking for my brothers. Al Kain, Hagidon Ali, if I can't take care of the first words, let me at least know where they are now. And it's not because he gave up. Not because he doubted that maybe they're not in Shechem. You hear this? He's thinking, maybe I missed a certain suburb that still belongs to Shechem that I don't know about. You know, sometimes, in other words, let me know. They have to be in the Shechem Asir, because my father said they're in Shechem. But maybe I'm looking around them, and maybe you know of a certain area, a certain, outlying extension of the vicinity of that belongs to the county of Shechem. Shechem has a city and it has a county. So maybe you know of some other extension around here that I don't know, and it will be Shechem. Okay, and there they are shepherding. And the man resolves the whole question. He says, I'll take shalach. It shouldn't bother you. Your father never told you to go to Shechem. Meaning, your father never said that you're going to meet them in Shechem. Your father says they are shepherding in Shechem. Well, at the time that your father said that, they were in Shechem. I've seen them. That's why he says, they were here. No sumizeh. They left here. Because by this, he resolved to him that his father's statement that they are in Shechem is true. Because at that time, they were in Shechem. Now, I will send you to them, not in Shechem. because they left from there. They went somewhere else. And his father said exactly what was going to happen. They were going to be somewhere else. But he has to fulfill that next part of the mission, not in the Shechem place, but somewhere else. He said truth. They left. He needed to fulfill the end of the mimer. To go wherever he will find them. Yosef, that's why it says Vayelech Yosef acher achiv. He's going after his brothers. It means he finally lets go of the Shechem whole thing, because he realizes that the Shechem was just a fact about which was true, but that's not no gay al halacha l'maisa. If you say this is not no gay to his conduct. Now he's going to teach his brothers. Shetevis achar achiv miyutarim is now Vayelech. It should have said Vayelech Yosef. Yosef went. Vayelech Yosef achar echa achar l'hoyde shulchach l'kayim ha'maimer. What's pushing Yosef is he has to fulfill what his father said, that he should go vayishlacheyu aleihem, to go to them. Achar achiv v'haven and understand. With this we conclude finally the whole piece. Yashiv will understand what. Remember, I asked the question earlier. The whole world is bothered. Why didn't Yosef not relate to his father? In Yonah Kol Yemei Yosef Beis Potifar, all the time that he was in the house of Potifar. Moshel v'Shalot bebeisai. He was ruling in Potiphar's house before he was arrested. And Potifar because of Molei. And more than that, if Yosef would have gotten the message down to Yaakov would have redeemed them with whatever the cost would have been. Yaakov was a wealthy man. And then especially the 9 years, 9 years Yosef was already king or viceroy of Egypt before his father came. Why didn't they let him know? The real truth, it's not a question. Yosef knew with the holy inspiration. He knew that there was a cherem. A cherem means they excommunicated anybody that would tell, and that excommunication would apply to Yosef as well. So he wasn't allowed to. That's also the reason Rashi says that Yitzchak also knew. And Yitzchak did not tell Yaakov because he knew that there was a cherem placed, and they took God into the minyan. The brothers, when they sold Yosef, got scared that Yaakov would find out. So the brothers were 10, and they made a Beis Din, and they said no one is allowed to tell Yaakov that Yosef was sold. And they went so far, and they took God as part of it. And they said they're being Mitzarev Hashem, and therefore anybody that messes with this cherem is bringing upon himself great calamity, because God agreed to this, and God did agree. Yaakov was not supposed to know, because this was supposed to lead Yaakov to Mitzrayim. So they had God's consent. They didn't misdiagnose or mismake a cherem. Their cherem was a real cherem. And Yosef knew that, so Yosef couldn't. He was bound by that excommunication that was going to happen if he would relate. That his soul, excommunication means you're cut off someone's soul. It's very dangerous. Until the brothers removed the cherem. And that's why no one stood Rakem Kadesh Lo Yavru Ala Cherem. And that was the reason why, one of the reasons why Yosef made sure that everybody left the room when he revealed himself to his brothers. Because the cherem was that no one would be announced. He wasn't allowed to tell anybody. There's no one, because we know the birds carry if you just tell one person, everybody's, I have a secret. So the word would have gotten to Yaakov. No one knew besides the brothers. Yitzchak knew at Ruach HaKodesh, but other than him, no one knew. So if Yosef is going to say Ani Yosef to his brothers, that you sold me to Egypt in front of the Egyptians, there would be a breach in that promise that they all kind of had to abide by. But after Yosef revealed himself to the brothers, they undid the cherem. Those who make a cherem can undo it. Then he was allowed to go tell his father, and others were allowed to find out about it. He didn't tell his father that he was sold, but he was allowed to tell his father where he is and so on. So, but on the simple reason, and aside from this, we need a reason. Why didn't Yosef say? Based on this, we understand. His father gave him instructions of what Yosef should say to him. His father spelled out X, Y, and Z. You need to come back and tell me about the state of the tikkun of the bris, the tikkun of the shalom, the tikkun that you're making in the world. That's the message I want to hear from you. That's what you're going to report to me. And until Yosef was not able to come back with that report, he could not tell anything to Yaakov. So, Sheishaviu l'simin davar sheyirem, I want a sign that I can see. He fulfilled seeking out the peace of his brothers and the peace of the sheep, like we discussed earlier. The sheep and the brothers are the tzon, were the corrupted sparks that fell down through the sins of Adam Arishon and all the generations, and they were rectified, and primarily because of impure intimacies and so on and so forth. And all of this was rectified in Lavan's house and went into the sheep, but it didn't reach its ultimate state of rectification until Yosef is going to elevate it to its ultimate state. So the brothers and the sheep, you got to check that out. And part of that is going to mean that Yosef is going to have muscle his way up to the top of Egypt so that the Jewish people will survive the most challenging exile that's going to challenge their sanctity and holiness. Hashem made him the master of Egypt. So even though he was a master for 9 years, but he didn't have them be circumcised until that year, the second year. Because the Torah later relates how they didn't have any food. First he fed them with money, then they paid all their money, then they brought all their animals, and then they started bringing and then they sold themselves as slaves. When they sold themselves as slaves, Yosef said, you're all going to circumcise. And that happened in the second year of the famine. Because the third year was no more a famine, because when Yaakov came down, there was no more famine. The famine he removed it. It was only 2-year famine. So this whole thing happened, and that's when Yosef completed the job to take dominance over Mitzrayim completely, and now he can come back to his father, and he said, mission accomplished. So this is why Vayeshev davar. He is dominating over the impurity of the land. In his power of his midah shashama brisai, that he guarded his covenant, and he weakened the power of the impure forces of Egypt. He circumcised their erva. He became a ruler over them. This was the second year to the hunger, exactly 9 years after he became the leader of all of Egypt. He didn't even have the ability to do it earlier. And it will be understood. A masterpiece. So I came here 10 minutes before the class, and I randomly picked this book, and I said, no, I should say maybe 20 minutes. And I opened up here, and I said, this looks like a nice piece. Let me read it quickly. And we read it, and I said, okay, I'm not feeling well. I really wasn't, so I couldn't do the usual I teach my marim. I said, let's do something that will read easier. And it paid off. Very special. L'chaim.